David's chef is in the office of Dr. Brown. David writes for a couple of magazines, but he isn't there for that. He is there to inquire on what is happening to his son Nick. Nick is a drug and alcohol addict, but worst of all, he is addicted to crystal meth. The movie takes us back to a year earlier. Nicholas Sheff is an 18-year-old boy who lives with his dad, David Sheff, stepmom Karen and his two siblings, Jasper and Daisy in San Francisco. Nick has left the house for 2 days now and no one knows his whereabouts. His worried father calls a hospital to check if Nick might have been admitted due to an accident or anything at all. After describing his son to them, they tell him no one like him is there. The next day, David calls Vicky, Nick's mom, to tell him about the situation. They end up blaming each other for their son's behavior. David goes to seek comfort from his wife. As she hugs him, the movie plays back to a younger Nick, about 8 years old, carrying his little brother Jasper in his arms for the first time. David sees Nick off at the airport. He's spending the summer with his mom. In the present time, David is bringing the kids home from school when he sees the car Nick used when he was leaving. He goes to Nick's room and sees him asleep and wrapped in his blanket. David tries to get Nick to tell him where he has been and what he has been doing, but Nick doesn't and tells his dad he needs to sleep. David takes Nick to a treatment center. At first he acts adamant and later changes his mind to do it for his dad's sake. The head of the center tells David there are still loads of drugs in his system but has an 80% high rate of success and 25% low rate of success, hence treatment needs to begin as soon as possible before things get out of hand. David agrees to have him stay there for 28 days to receive treatment. He wants the best for his son. David hugs him and leaves. His stay at the center begins. Nick meets his dad and Karen after spending some time in the center. His counselors tell David that they feel he has made great progress. Nick informs his dad he wants to move to the center's halfway house, a place where he can have a normal life and find a job. Nick wants to suspend the idea of going to college for now. He feels he is a big boy now and needs to be independent despite the fact that he applied to 6 colleges and got admission into all of them. David isn't quite happy about it but accepts it anyway. One day, while cooking a meal at home, David gets a call from the recovery center. They inform him that Nick left the center during free time today and hasn't returned. David asks if they have sent someone out to look for him, but the lady says that isn't part of the job they do at the center. David finds Nick shivering outside in the heavy rain. He rushes out of his car to help Nick get into the car. Nick opens up about the drugs he has been taking, the alcohol he has been consuming and the number of years now since he started. The worst of them all being crystal meth. His dad gets furious and feels hurt upon hearing what Nick confessed. He thought he had the best father and son relationship with Nick, but no, he was hiding his drug abuse moments from him for years. Nick gets better after some time and goes on surfing with his dad. Nick calls his dad to tell him he has had a change of mind about not going to college. A guy from the center spoke to him about it. Nick loves writing and for that reason he wants to master it in college. David takes Nick to his college and hugs him goodbye. Nick begins another phase in his life. He reads his favorite poem by Charles Bukowski to the class. David joins Jasper and Daisy throwing paintballs to make designs. Everyone present in the class fixed their eyes on Nick, but one girl's gaze was different from them all. Nick becomes friends with her and they eventually start dating. They two spend most of the time together at the park and in the library. One day, while in her house, Nick excuses himself to use the bathroom. He finds some drugs in the bathroom and takes them. Nick goes back to doing drugs again. He returns home, enjoys dinner and plays a game with his family. When night falls, he asks his dad about using his car out to a meeting he claims he has in town. The next morning, Jasper is accusing Daisy of taking his long-time savings. Daisy cries out that she knows nothing about it. David confronts Nick about the missing money. Nick aggressively denies it, but David sees through his actions that he stole the money for drugs. Moreover, he's high right now. Nick goes to his room to pack up and leaves, having no idea of where he's heading to. We see the beginning of the movie again. David goes to Dr. Brown to inquire about the drug Nick is addicted to and what he can do to help him. The doctor interprets that meth is a dangerous and highly addictive drug. People who are addicted to it can't be in a normal rehab center. The success rate of getting them back to be their normal selves is a slim 8%. David buys a meal for a junkie girl so he can learn about how they feel and uses cocaine to get a feel of what happens when one is high. David goes to an eatery to have a conversation with Nick. David begins to have flashbacks of when he spent time with Nick as a little boy in the same restaurant. Nick arrives in no time. He starts asking his dad for money for his upkeep and for drugs. David tries to talk him into coming back home, but he resists and leaves with tears in his eyes. Days pass by. One night, David receives a call from a hospital in New York about Nick. David flies to New York to go for his son. Upon reaching the hospital, A nurse informs him Nick checked out without the doctor's orders. David decides to leave. While waiting for the plane, he receives a call from Nick and he goes to meet up with him in a coffee shop. He looks at his dad with his pale face and tells him he's done with drugs, so David takes him home. Nick's mom calls and tells David she wants to take it from here. Vicky wants Nick to move to Los Angeles and begin a whole new treatment. David remembers the first time Nick was going to his mom to spend summer. Nick was sad to leave his dad, but David assures him that he loves him more than everything. Hearing this, little Nick hugs his dad and then leaves with the flight attendant. Nick moves in with his mom and establishes a healthy relationship with Spencer, his sponsor, and now Nick goes 14 months clean. Nick visits his dad and Karen in San Francisco. He plays with the kids. David takes Nick's urine to do a drug test because he came home late from a meeting even though he has been clean for 485 days. Nick graduates from college. He starts feeling uneasy and gives his sponsor a call to explain to him how he's feeling. Spencer tells him to hold on and even invites him over for dinner. Nick doesn't go. He runs into his old girlfriend. Nick tells her he's being sober for some time and is looking forward to some party. Lauren brings in some drugs and Nick injects himself. He does the same for Lauren. They both get high and then get intimate. Vicky calls David and informs him that Nick hasn't been home for 2 days now. They end up yelling at each other and trading blames. David packs his bag and goes to look for Nick again. Karen gets into an argument with him. She makes it clear to him that he can't fix him no matter how hard he tries. Later, when the whole family is out, Nick and Lauren break into the house. When they arrive back home, Nick sees them beforehand and calls Lauren so that they can leave the place without being noticed. Jasper sees them and tells his mom. She follows them for some miles until she gives up and breaks down in tears. Lauren becomes unconscious from taking too much of the drug. Nick calls an ambulance. He performs CPR, successfully bringing her back before the ambulance arrives. The paramedic performs some tests and insists on taking her to the ER. The ambulance leaves with Lauren, leaving Nick alone frustrated. He calls his dad for help, but David turns him away. He advises him to call his sponsor for help and tells him he loves him. David removes all of Nick's pictures around the house. Vicky calls David. She tells him Nick called her. Vicky claims he needs help and won't survive without their help. David tells Vicky he is never going to change no matter how hard they try. Vicky still wants to help his son. David and Karen start attending Al-Anon groups to help them go over their problems. Nick starts doing another drug again. He injects himself and lays helpless in a public washroom as the drug consumes his whole body. In the next scene, David is at the hospital with Vicky. Nick almost died using that drug, so the doctors say it is close to a miracle that he's still alive. David walks Nick out of the place into the outdoors, a peaceful and serene environment. They sit quietly and Nick breaks down and begins to cry. David rubs his back and comforts him by giving him a hug.